The Apache boy was branded a traitor, until the elder whispered the truth in his final breath. Before we begin, if you're listening to this, let me know where in the world you are watching from. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and if this story moves you, give it a like. The desert night was not silent. It never was. The wind had a voice, an old one, low and endless, as if it had been carrying secrets since the first campfires were lit. And under that sound, there was the faint crackle of burning mesquite wood, the creak of saddle leather, and the soft hiss of sand shifting in the dark. That was the night they bound Koa's wrists. He was no more than 16 summers old, but his face held none of the softness of youth. The days had stripped it away, leaving only the sharp angles of survival. His eyes, deep, black pools that once laughed easily, now stared ahead without a flicker. His people, the ones who had sung his name in the cradle, now would not meet his gaze. The council had spoken before the sun dipped behind the redstone cliffs. Koa was a traitor. They said he had led the enemy to their water hole, that his footprints had been found where no Apache should walk unless guided by betrayal, that a band of blue-coated soldiers had appeared, where they should never have found their way, and that the only answer was treachery from within. Koa had said nothing in his defense, not because he had no words, but because words would fall into the dust and vanish. The elder, Neshoba, watched from the edge of the circle. His hair was white as the moonlight that touched the canyon walls, his shoulders heavy with the weight of 80 winters. He had not spoken either. Not yet. Koa's mother, her hair bound in mourning braids, did not weep. She kept her eyes fixed on the fire, her lips pressed tight as if the flames themselves might burn her if she faltered. When they led Koa away from the fire and into the shadow of the mesquite grove, the boy's thoughts drifted not to his own fear, but to the stillness of the stars above. There was a strange peace in their distance, as though they did not care whether a man was guilty or innocent, only that he had once breathed under their light. The guard behind him muttered something in the tongue of the border towns, words Koa did not care to hear. Ahead, the desert yawned open, wide and without mercy. They were taking him to the old canyon, the place where exile was a quieter word for death. But as they reached the edge of the grove, Neshoba stepped forward. The old man's shadow was long and trembling in the firelight, his eyes fixed on Koa in a way that silenced the whispers. He laid a hand on the boy's shoulder, and though the weight was gentle, it carried the gravity of mountains. "Walk with me," the elder said, his voice steady. And in that moment, though Koa did not yet know it, the truth, the kind that could bury a man or free him, had begun to stir. The night was deep when Neshoba led Koa. Away from the circle of firelight, the murmurs of the tribe faded behind them, swallowed by the low hum of the desert wind. The boy's wrists were still bound, but the elder's hand on his shoulder was not the grip of a captor. It was something else, a tether, a quiet assurance, though to what, Koa could not yet name. They walked without words. The sand shifted under their moccasins, and every step seemed to echo louder than it should in the stillness. Overhead, the sky was a black river spilled with stars, their light pooling faintly on the pale rock faces of the canyon ahead. Koa knew this place. Every child did. The canyon was where the tribe sent their dead, not with bodies, but with names whispered once into the darkness, never to be spoken again. It was a place of endings. When they reached the mouth of the canyon, Neshoba stopped. His breath was steady, but his eyes searched the shadows as if they were listening for something. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know why they call you traitor, boy?" Koa's jaw tightened. "Because they wish it to be so." A flicker of something approval, perhaps, passed through the elder's gaze. "They see what they fear most, and fear makes the heart cruel." The boy looked away. The canyon walls rose around them, steep and silent, and somewhere far above, a coyote's call split the air. "They say you led the blue coats to our water." Neshoba continued, his voice low, as though the shadows themselves might be listening. "But I saw the tracks. They were not yours." Koa turned back sharply. "Then why?" "Because," the elder cut in, "sometimes truth cannot be spoken before its time. The desert swallows those who speak too soon." The words settled heavy between them. Koa felt them in his chest, but he did not yet understand them. Neshoba began walking again, deeper into the canyon. "You will not die here tonight," he said over his shoulder, "but you must vanish. Let them think you are gone. Only in absence can the true enemy be revealed." Koa's mind was a storm suspicion, relief, Fear, but the old man's voice anchored him. He realized now that Neshoba had not come to condemn him, but to guide him into the shadows where answers lived at the far end of the canyon, where the moonlight barely touched the rock. The elder stopped once more. He reached into the folds of his robe and drew out a small leather pouch. Worn and stained from years of travel, this was your father's, Neshoba said, placing it into Koa's hands. It holds what you will need. Koa felt the weight of it not heavy, but dense, as though it carried something more than its size suggested. He wanted to ask what was inside, but the elder's eyes silenced him. The boy nodded, his throat tight. Neshoba placed his hand on Koa's cheek for a brief, steady moment, the kind of gesture a man makes when he knows it may be his last. Then the elder turned and walked back into the darkness, leaving Koa alone with the canyon and the weight of the truth yet to come. The first light of dawn crept over the desert like a whispered promise, not bright, but enough to stain the edges of the sky with pale gold. Koa had not slept. He had sat in the cold shadows of the canyon, feeling the stone's chill seep into his bones, the elder's words replaying in his mind until they became part of his breath. He opened the leather pouch. Inside was a small, carved bone talisman strung on a cord of sinew, a handful of dried mesquite beans, and a strip of folded cloth. When he unwrapped the cloth, he found a shard of glass, smooth on one side, sharp on the other, catching the light like a drop of frozen water. He did not know what it meant. By the time the sun's edge touched the canyon rim, Koa was moving, east, as Neshoba had said, keeping to the ridges where the ground broke in sharp, dry spines. From here, he could see far across the valley, the slow curves of the river, the pale dust of abandoned trails, the thin smoke of camps he would never again walk into. The wind was at his back, carrying with it the smell of creosote and distant rain. Somewhere far to the south, thunder rumbled. The sky was split between sunlight and shadow, and Koa felt caught between both. By midday, heat shimmered over the land. He found a shaded alcove beneath a shelf of rock and sat to rest, chewing slowly on the beans from the pouch. The bitterness filled his mouth, but it kept the hunger away. That was when he saw movement on the far ridge, small, quick, low to the ground. At first, he thought it was a coyote, but then it stood upright, and he knew it was a man. The figure paused, scanning the valley, then disappeared behind the rocks. Koa stayed still. Whoever it was had not seen him, or so he hoped, but his heart was already pounding. The enemy could walk in many skins. When the light began to fade, Koa moved again, following the eastern ridge until it dipped into a narrow ravine. The shadows here grew long and deep, and the air cooled enough that the sound of his breath seemed louder than his steps. He stopped when he found a circle of stones at the ravine floor. It was an old fire pit, cold, abandoned, but marked with patterns in the ash. Circles within circles, broken by a single line. He had seen these before, carved into bark by scouts who traveled ahead of the tribe, a sign meant to be read only by those who knew its meaning. Koa crouched, tracing the pattern with his fingers. The last time he'd seen such a mark, his father had been alive. Above him, the sky was now indigo, stars beginning to pierce the dusk. The desert had a way of hiding its truths until the dark came. And Koa realized something. Someone else had walked this path before him, and not long ago. He pulled the talisman from the pouch and held it tight. The elder had sent him east for a reason, and in the silence of the ravine, Koa began to understand. This journey was not exile. It was a trail. Night thickened until the world was reduced to shadow and sound. The rustle of unseen creatures, the far-off cry of a night bird, the quiet hiss of wind through the ravine. Koa stayed crouched beside the old fire pit, his hand resting on the talisman, his eyes sweeping the darkness for movement. The footsteps came softly, almost too soft to notice. He heard them before he saw the shape emerging from the far side of the ravine. A tall figure, wrapped in a blanket of worn wool, its edges frayed like the fringe of a ghost. Koa did not move. The figure stopped just outside the circle of stones and tilted its head, as if listening to something that Koa could not hear. Then, without speaking, the stranger bent down and drew another line in the ash, crossing the first. The mark was complete now, though Koa still didn't know its meaning. The stranger straightened, and in the faint light of the stars, Koa caught the glint of something on the man's chest, a medallion, small but bright, not silver, not gold, Something older. Your father wore one like this." The man said, his voice low, roughened by years of wind. Koa's throat tightened. "You knew him?" The man nodded once. "I was with him the night he disappeared." The words were like a knife sliding between old scars. For years, Koa had lived with silence about that night. His father had gone into the desert with 2 other scouts, and only the others had returned, and even they had spoken nothing of what happened. "Why have you followed me?" Koa asked. The man's eyes were dark, unreadable. "Because you are about to step into the same storm he did, and storms leave few standing." He reached into his blanket and drew out a small bundle of hide, tied with rawhide cord. "When you find the river bend with the 3 cottonwoods, bury this beneath the roots of the middle tree. Do not open it." Koa hesitated, then took the bundle. It was heavier than it looked. "Why me?" The man's gaze flickered to the talisman in Koa's hand. "Because Neshoba trusts you, and because the truth is not for the ears of those who have already judged you." Before Koa could ask more, the stranger stepped back into the darkness, his outline swallowed by the ravine walls. His footsteps faded until only the wind remained. Koa stood alone again, the bundle in his hands, his mind heavy with questions. The fire pit's markings glowed faintly in the starlight, as though the ash itself remembered old heat. Somewhere behind him, far beyond the ridges, the tribe still called him Traitor. But here, in the dark belly of the desert, Koa began to feel something else entirely, a pull, like the current of a river beneath still water, and he knew he would follow it. By the time Koa reached the river bend, the sky had turned to a pale wash of morning, and mist clung to the banks like a sleeping spirit reluctant to leave. The water was low, a silver thread winding lazily between stretches of sand and stone, but the cottonwoods stood tall above it, their roots clutching the earth like gnarled hands. He counted them. 1, 2, 3. The middle tree leaned slightly toward the river, its bark scarred with old lightning. It felt older than the others, as if it had been standing there long before Koa's tribe had walked this land. The bundle the stranger had given him felt heavier now, as though the journey itself had added weight. Koa knelt at the base of the middle tree, digging with his hands until the damp earth gave way. He lowered the bundle into the hollow, then began covering it with soil, pressing it down until no trace remained. When he was finished, he sat back and listened to the sound of the river. It was a soft murmur, like voices speaking too far away to understand. His father had once told him rivers remembered everything they carried. He wondered what this one might remember of him. The sound of a twig snapping broke the stillness. Koa turned quickly, his hand instinctively going to the shard of glass in his pouch. A young woman stood at the edge of the trees, her hair long and dark, her eyes sharp with suspicion. She wore a dress of faded calico and carried a bow, the string taut between her fingers. "You're far from your people," she said. "So are you," Koa replied. She stepped closer, lowering the bow only slightly. "I saw you bury something. It's nothing for you to worry about." "Everything in this land is something to worry about," she said, "especially when strangers are hiding things in the ground." Koa held her gaze, weighing whether to speak the truth. But something in her stance, the way she balanced her weight, the quiet steadiness in her eyes, told him she was no ordinary wanderer. "Who are you?" he asked. "Someone who's been following the same trail as you," she answered. "And if you value your life, you'll stop asking questions until we're far from here." Before he could reply, she turned and began walking along the riverbank. After a moment, Koa followed. The talisman in his pouch felt warm against his side, as if it recognized the path they were now taking. He didn't yet know why the stranger had trusted him with the bundle, or why Neshoba had sent him east, but as he followed the woman through the mist, he felt the threads of something larger tightening around him. A story begun long before he was born, and one that would not end without blood. They traveled in silence for most of the morning, the woman always a few paces ahead, her bow slung across her back. Koa kept his eyes on the ground, reading the earth as his father had taught him. The mud near the river was soft enough to take impressions, and soon he began to notice them. Tracks, half hidden in the reeds. Not deer, not coyote, human. They were fresh, the edges still sharp, and they followed the river's curve, in the same direction. The 2 of them were walking. Koa stopped and crouched to study them. "They've been here less than an hour," he said quietly. The woman glanced back, her eyes narrowing. "Then they know we're here." Koa stood. "Who are they?" She hesitated. Men who would kill us both if they knew what we were carrying. Men who think the land belongs only to them. They moved faster after that, leaving the riverbank for higher ground where the mud gave way to dry grass. The sun was climbing, but clouds were beginning to gather to the west. Heavy, low, the kind that promised a storm by nightfall. By midday, they reached a narrow pass between two ridges. The woman stopped and motioned for Koa to stay low. Ahead, the trail narrowed to a strip of hard-packed earth flanked by boulders. And there, half hidden in the shadows, was a rifle barrel. Koa's breath caught. The man holding it wore the faded blue of a soldier's coat. But the insignia had been cut away. His face was weathered, his eyes pale and cold as stone. The woman touched Koa's arm. "We can't go through," she whispered. "We'll have to circle around." They retreated into the brush, moving quietly until the ridge curved enough to hide them from sight. But Koa couldn't shake the image of the soldier, the way he had been waiting, as if expecting them. When they finally stopped to drink from a small spring, Koa asked, "Why are they after you?" She met his gaze. "It's not me they're after. It's you." The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant rumble of thunder. Koa felt the storm pressing closer, and with it, the sense that his exile had been nothing, more than the first step into a much deeper hunt. By late afternoon, the sky was a low ceiling of charcoal clouds. The light had turned to a muted silver, and the air held that tense stillness that comes before rain. Koa and the woman, she still had not given her name, kept to the shelter of the ridge, moving in long, steady strides. The past they had avoided earlier now lay behind them. But Koa couldn't shake the feeling that eyes still followed from somewhere in the rocks. Every gust of wind brought the faint creak of leather, the dry whisper of grit shifting under boots. They reached a hollow where a cluster of scrub oak grew, their branches twisted from years of wind. Here, the woman finally stopped. She knelt in the dirt and began to dig with her hands until she uncovered a flat stone. Beneath it lay a strip of cloth, weathered and stained, with a single symbol stitched in dark thread, a circle broken by 3 lines. Koa stared. "I've seen this before, in the ash of a fire pit." She looked up at him. "Then you've already crossed their trail." "Whose trail?" Her eyes darkened. "The ones who killed your father." The words landed like a stone in his chest. Rain began to fall, slow, heavy drops that darkened the dust where they struck. Koa's mind was already spinning with questions, but she rose and pulled her bow over her shoulder. "They were soldiers once," she said, "but they no longer serve any flag. They hunt what they're paid to hunt. Land, water, people. If you saw their sign, it means they're already close." Lightning flickered along the horizon, and the wind shifted, bringing the smell of wet earth. As the rain thickened, they found shelter in a shallow cave carved into the base of the ridge. They built no fire. The light would be seen for miles, and instead sat in the half-dark, listening to the rain drum against the stone. Koa turned the talisman over in his hand, feeling the grooves in the bone. His father had worn it. Neshoba had kept it, and now it was his. "You knew my father?" he asked. The woman's gaze flickered toward him, then away. "I knew of him, and I know he died for something worth more than his life. The same thing they'll kill you for if they can." Koa waited, but she said no more. Outside, the rain was now a steady roar, and the pass would be impassable by morning. Somewhere deep in his chest, Koa felt the shift. The exile had become a pursuit, and the pursuit was drawing them both toward the same place. His father's trail had ended. The storm broke in the early hours before dawn. The air was cold and clean, and the desert smelled of sage and wet stone. They left the cave at first light, their clothes damp, the earth beneath their feet soft enough to take an imprint. By mid-morning, the land began to rise into a series of cliffs streaked with colors: rust, gold, and deep crimson, the layers of centuries laid bare. The woman slowed as they approached a narrow fissure in the rock. "In here," she said. Koa followed her through the passage, the stone walls closing tight around them until the light faded to a dim amber glow. When the passage widened again, he stopped. The walls ahead were covered in handprints, hundreds of them, pressed into the rock in pigments of red and black. Some were small, the size of a child's. Others were broad and strong, all faced outward, as if reaching for something beyond the stone. "This place is older than our people," she said quietly. "It is where the hunted came to leave their mark, so they would not be forgotten." Koa ran his fingers over one of the prints. The stone was cool, but he imagined the heat of the hand that had left it. She knelt at the base of the far wall, where a small pile of stones covered a hollow. Your father came here. He left something for Neshoba. That's how the elder knew where to send you. From the hollow, she drew a bundle wrapped in hide, smaller than the one Koa had buried. She handed it to him. It's yours now. He untied the cord and unwrapped the hide. Inside was a strip of leather, etched with markings in a language Koa didn't know, not words, but lines and shapes that seemed to map something unseen. Before he could study it further, a sound echoed through the fissure, the sharp clatter of stone under a boot. The woman's eyes met his. No words were needed. They slipped into the shadows, the bundle hidden once more beneath his cloak. Whoever had entered the fissure was not here for the handprints. They were here for him. The sound of footsteps in the fissure was deliberate, slow, unhurried, as if the one approaching knew there was nowhere for his quarry to run. Koa's back pressed against the cold stone, the bundle hidden under his cloak, his hand gripping the shard of glass from Neshoba's pouch. The woman moved like shadow, slipping between rock columns until she found a narrow alcove high enough to give them a vantage. They crouched in silence, breathing shallowly. The man who emerged into the chamber of painted hands was tall, broad-shouldered, his coat soaked from the rain. The insignia on his collar was torn away, but the pale stripe of sun-faded cloth marked where it had once been. His eyes scanned the walls, lingering briefly on the prints before sweeping the ground. Koa recognized him. He had stood with the other soldiers the day his father never came back. The man's gaze fixed on the hollow where the bundle had been hidden. He crouched, running his hand over the disturbed dust, then stood and turned his head slowly, as though listening to the walls themselves. The woman's bow was in her hands now, an arrow nocked but not drawn. Her eyes asked a question. Koa shook his head. Not yet. After a long moment, the man spat into the dust and left the way he had come, his boots grinding against the stone. The echoes faded until the fissure was still again. Koa let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They're too close, the woman said. If we stay on foot, we won't reach the mesa in time. What's at the mesa? Answers, she said simply. And the last place your father stood alive. Koa looked back at the painted hands before they left. In the dim light, they seemed almost to shift, as though the stone remembered every face, every last breath. He touched one, larger than his own, and imagined it might have been his father's. The wind outside the fissure had changed. It carried with it the dry scent of distant smoke. Someone was burning campfires ahead of them. By the next day, the land had risen into broken tablelands, their flat tops sheared by centuries of wind. The air was thin here, carrying the cry of hawks and the whisper of unseen things moving far below. The woman led them to a steep slope where stone steps, worn and crumbling, climbed to the mesa's edge. This is where he waited for them, she said. Koa followed her upward. The climb left his legs aching, but when they reached the top, the view was endless, ridges fading into the horizon, a silver thread of river winding between them. At the center of the mesa was a single post of cedar, weathered and split. Tied to it was a length of leather like the one in Koa's bundle, etched with similar markings. This was a warning, the woman said, tracing the symbols. Your father saw something coming, something bigger than soldiers or tribes. He left these for Neshoba, but the elder could never decipher them all. Koa unwrapped the hide bundle and laid both strips side by side. The markings aligned, forming a map, not of places, but of water, hidden springs, seasonal rivers, underground channels. Life itself in the desert. That's why they killed him, Koa murmured. Not for what he had done, but for what he knew. The wind rose, carrying a sound from below, the crack of gunfire. The woman's eyes sharpened. They found the trail, she said. We can't stay here. Koa rolled the leather tightly, tucking it into his pouch. But before they could move, a voice rose from the slope, deep, old, and unmistakable. Koa. Neshoba stood at the top of the steps, his chest heaving, his eyes bright despite the long climb. His presence was both a relief and a warning. They're coming, the elder said, his voice ragged. And there's something you must know before they reach us. They moved to the lee of a rock wall, the wind muffling their words. Neshoba's face was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes never left Koa's. I told them you were a traitor, he said. The words struck harder than any blow. Why? Because it was the only way to keep you alive. The elder said, his voice breaking. If they believed you had betrayed us, they would exile you, not kill you. It gave me time to lead you to what your father died to protect. Koa felt the weight of the leather bundle like a stone in his hands. He died for water. No, Neshoba said. He died for balance. Water belongs to all who walk this land, but there are those who would claim it for themselves. Choke the life from everyone else. Your father stopped them once. You must stop them again. The woman glanced toward the slope. Shadows were moving closer, rifles glinting in the sun. Neshoba reached into his robe and pulled out a small, carved piece of bone, the twin of Koa's talisman. 2 pieces of the same heart, he said. Your father's and mine. Keep them together, and you will find the spring that feeds them all. Koa took the talisman, his fingers trembling. The elder's breath grew labored. When I am gone, follow the river until it sings. You will know the place when you hear it. Gunfire cracked again, closer now. Neshoba's eyes closed briefly, then opened with the last of his strength. Koa, your father did not die alone. He lived long enough to see you safe. The rifle shot came as Neshoba spoke his last word. The elder staggered, his hand clutching Koa's shoulder before he sank to the ground. Koa caught him, lowering him gently against the rock. Blood bloomed dark against his robe, but his eyes were calm, almost peaceful. They will come for you, Neshoba whispered. But remember, the land remembers its own. Koa leaned close, straining to hear. The elder's voice had grown faint, but each word cut through the wind. Your father was no scout when he died. He was the keeper, and now so are you. A long breath shuddered from him, and then there was only the wind. The woman's hand gripped Koa's arm. We have to move. But Koa stayed for 1 heartbeat longer, his forehead resting against the elder's. The twin talismans clutched tight in his palm. Then he rose. The shadows of the pursuers crept closer. But the map was secure, the truth planted deep in his chest. They descended the far side of the mesa, the sound of the wind in their ears like a song half forgotten. And somewhere beyond the ridges, beyond the reach of the soldiers' guns, a river waited, one that sang when it flowed, carrying the memory of all who had fought to keep it free. Koa did not look back. The boy who had been branded a traitor was gone. Only the keeper remained.